Once again, hello guys. Today I'll recap The Secretary, a 2002 romantic drama film. The movie begins with a woman named Lee, whose hands are tied with a rope and who is working at an office in just this state. After that, we see Lee being discharged from a mental hospital in a flashback scene from 6 months ago. Lee was about to be discharged from the hospital, but she was not happy in the least. Lee's sister's wedding is also taking place today, so her mother comes to pick her up. Then Lee's mother joins her at the wedding. Lee is on the verge of a mental breakdown during this wedding. Just then, Lee's old friend Peter approaches her. And after a brief conversation with Lee, Lee expresses her boredom with the wedding. Then Peter takes Lee's hand in his, and the two of them begin to dance. This wedding also includes Lee's father. Because he drinks too much, he is brought into the room. Actually, Lee's father is an alcoholic, which is why his relationship with his wife is tense, and as a result, Lee has numerous family issues. In addition, her family is prone to fights. Lee is upset to see her father in this state, so she goes to her room and cries, attempting to injure herself with a sharp object. But, after some thinking, she decides against it. Actually, Lee hurts herself whenever she feels bad, and it feels good to her. Lee's mother sent her to a mental hospital after she cut her vein. At the start of the film, Lee was being released from the same mental hospital, and now she wants to repair herself and start over. As a reason, she also learns to type so that she could get a job. Lee throws all of her sharp objects into the trash can. But then she notices her mother storing all of the sharp objects in a cabin. Lee is hurt to see that even her mother does not trust her, which is why she takes those sharp objects out of the trash once more. Then Lee notices a newspaper in the trash that contains an advertisement for a secretary job. There was a vacancy for a lawyer's secretary, so Lee goes to that office for an interview. She notices that there are many files scattered all through the office, and the worker who used to work there earlier walks out crying in front of Lee. Then we see the boss of this office, who happens to be a lawyer. Mr. Gray is his name. Mr. Gray is a strange person. When Lee walks into the office, he is completely absorbed in his thoughts and does not react to anything. Lee is confused and begins to walk away, but Gray stops her and begins the interview. Gray asks Lee some strange questions throughout the interview. Gray then instructs Lee to make coffee. Her mother would have been delighted to learn that Lee had gotten the job. Lee then begins working and does so diligently. Gray is now taking care of the flowers in his office. Then Lee brings coffee and donuts over there, and Gray informs Lee that he has thrown an important file in the trash, and he instructs Lee to get the file after Lee has left. Throws those donuts in the trash. Lee then goes downstairs and begins looking in the trash for the file. Gray is looking out the upstairs window at everything and is overjoyed to see Lee struggling like this. Then Lee discovers the file and notices her mother waiting to pick her up, but Lee still had 5 hours to do the work. Actually, Lee's mother and father had fighting, and she was waiting here to get away from her husband. Then Lee takes the file to Gray. Gray then informs her that he now has the file. He didn't need that file because he already had a copy, and he's been making Lee useless ever since. He was having fun watching Lee struggle. Gray then informs Lee that there are too many rats in the office, and he requests that Lee set up a mousetrap. Lee bending over to place the mousetrap. Then Gray notices Lee's cut on his body. Gray's ex-wife then shows up at the office after a while. Gray hides inside his closet when he sees his ex-wife. When Lee arrives to look for him, Gray informs Lee to tell that he is not here from inside the closet to his ex-wife. When Gray's ex-wife learns of this, she tells Lee that she will stay and wait for him till he arrives. Lee then receives a phone call from her father, which makes her sad. While on the phone, Gray's wife begins to touch the items in the office, which is seen by Lee. Her father is put on hold. Gray tells her wife to go immediately. Gray's wife becomes furious upon hearing this and leaves. Lee picks up her father's phone call after she leaves, but her father has already hung up. Lee becomes quite tense as a result of all of this. In her rage, she tries to damage herself again. Lee then removes a sharp object from her bag. She then prepares to cut herself. Gray then notices it. Lee does not harm herself after seeing Gray, and she returns the sharp objects inside. Following that, Lee takes Peter out to dinner, and Peter then proposes to Lee for marriage. She agrees to this proposal. Gray was also present, and he'd been keeping a close eye on everything. When Lee arrives at the office the next day, Gray acts strangely toward her. Lee types a letter that is poorly written. When Gray notices the errors, he scolds her severely and instructs her to retype the letter. She approaches Gray after finishing the letter. Gray then informs Lee that he dislikes Lee's dress sense and makeup. The next day, Peter invites Lee to his home to meet his parents. Peter's parents adore Lee, and Peter's mother informs Lee that Peter's sister is marrying next month. Peter's mother has requested that they marry on the same day. Lee has second thoughts after hearing the wedding because she has the feeling that things are moving too quickly. Lee goes to work the next day and Gray instructs him on how to communicate with his client. After a while, they both sit on the sofa and Gray inquires about Peter. Gray inquires as to whether Lee loves Peter and wishes to marry him. This question makes Lee feel extremely embarrassed and she tells Gray that she isn't sure about her and Peter's marriage. Gray then tells Lee that he knows she cut herself after a while. Gray then asks Lee to promise that she will not cut or hurt herself in the future. After that, Gray tells Lee that she should go home alone today and it will make her happy. Following their talk, the two begin to understand each other better. Lee then tells her mother to go home and begins walking alone down the road. She feels wonderful when she walks alone and she regains her confidence. Gray used to have a photo of his ex-wife in his office near the flowers, but now he keeps a photo of Lee there. A few days later, Lee makes another printing error, which enrages Gray, who summons Lee to his office to be punished. He begins slapping Lee on the back. Lee begins to enjoy this punishment and begins to enjoy doing Gray in this manner. Following this incident, Lee begins to feel attracted to Gray and as a result, Lee throws all of the sharp objects into the water that she used to injure herself. Gray now has complete control over Lee. The Gray essentially decided what Lee had to do and what and how much she had to eat. As the days pass, the punishment continues in this manner. Lee approaches Gray and asks if she can spend the night with him. Gray realizes Lee has fallen in love with her after hearing this and refuses to participate. Following that, Gray and Lee's distance is maintained. Lee's father's health continues to deteriorate. He had to be hospitalized as a result of this. Lee is now completely broken and she goes to Gray's house to meet him. Gray doesn't say much to Lee even here. Lee then exits the residence. Lee now purposefully makes mistakes in order to attract Gray's attention, but he also ignores them. Lee once placed an earthworm into a letter and sent it to him. When Gray sees the letter, he chooses to punish Lee this time and summons her to his office. And tells Lee to kneel. Lee expects Gray to be intimate with her this time, but Gray masturbates and asks her to go. Gray gradually realizes that whatever he is doing with Lee is wrong and he burns all of his memories of him. He then dismisses Lee from her position. Lee becomes enraged and slaps Gray, telling him that she likes him, but Gray does not listen to her and fires her. She tries to work in various of places after being fired from her job, but she does not feel well and she used to stand outside Gray's office often. Gray had changed the locks in his office to prevent Lee from entering. Peter takes the ring and goes to Lee a few days later and this time Lee accepts to marry. At the time of the wedding, Peter's mother prepares Lee for marriage. While getting ready, she discovers that she only loves Gray and, upon recognizing this, she places Peter's ring on her finger. Lee runs up to Gray and expresses her feelings to him. Gray warns her that they can't live like this for the rest of their life, but Gray agrees to take the test at Lee's request. He tells Lee to place her hand on the table and not to move it until he says so. Gray walks away from there after saying this. Lee remains in the same state for a long time before Peter arrives, looking for her. Lee tells him she doesn't want to be with him and keeps her hand on the deck as Gray waits motionless outside watching everything. He calls from the landline, but Lee takes the phone in her mouth again without lifting her hand. After that, Gray too leaves the place. Then Lee's parents and many friends arrive to attempt to persuade her. Lee, on the other hand, does not listen to those people and does not consume any food. Lee is in this situation for 3 to 4 days and word of her actions travels throughout the media. Finally, Gray arrives to meet Lee, lifts her up in his lap and drives her home, where the two become intimate. Following that, they begin to live as a happy couple. And the movie ends here. I hope you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Comment down below which movie should I recap next.